Hi, and welcome to this new episode of Dreamers and Doers, where I interview people who follow their passion and use it to make the world better. And I think that's you, Kevin. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Stoked to be here. Excited for this one.
Man, I'm super excited about this interview because we're going to talk about masculinity. We're going to talk about relationships, sensuality. And to be really upfront, it's been a part of my journey in the past 6 months, especially kind of graduating from a boy to becoming a man for my business, also for my personal life. And you've been helping me quite a bit on that journey, even if you might not know it, because I've been watching a lot your videos on Instagram. They're amazing. We'll tell people at the end how they can follow you. And I think it's such an important message that not a lot of people talk about. So as usual, I like to start with my guest story. What got you into it?
Yeah, Alex, it's an epic question. And, like many things in life, I couldn't find it outside myself. So I had to find it within, right? And study this and train in this on my own. And that's been a big part of my hero's path and my journey into myself and through a lot of the suffering I experienced as well. Because the pain and the suffering is what opened me and opened the cracks into these kinds of things. So just a short backstory, born and raised in Texas in the States. And what I found was that there wasn't, although culture gave you some options, none of them were healthy, really powerful, embodied rites of passage, right? And there was nothing like an initiation from boys to men. And if you study the ancient cultures, all tribes, all indigenous people of the earth have had something like this, especially for men. Women have it too, it's just different. But men have to have a ritual, a witnessing, a trial, some kind of experience, which can be instant or prolonged and profound, to mark the transition from childhood to adulthood. And I didn't find this anywhere. I had masculine mentors. I was an Eagle Scout. I did a lot of outdoor trekking and backpacking, but even then it wasn't a full spectrum experience, right? And so I played sports as well, and I didn't find it there. And I didn't find it in school. So I just wondered why none of the men around me, even the older adults who, as far as I could tell, even as a young man, still with plenty of my own ego and my pride and all my bullshit, I realized that most of the adult men around me I grew up with were still children. And the way they treated their partners and the way they, spoke and acted, they were just young teenage boys in adult bodies. And I really longed for the wisdom and the sages that I was reading about. I was an avid reader. I was a total nerd at that time. I was geeking out on sci-fi and Eastern philosophy and, fiction novels and literature. And I found a deep well of information there and a deep, longing to know more. And that led me on my path, which flashed forward into school, starting to date and fall in love young. I didn't know how to be in a relationship. My parents didn't offer a good example, loved them dearly, but I didn't have a map. So I had to learn the hard way. And that looked like a lot of pain, a lot of emasculation, a lot of wounding, miscommunication, and, just disembodiment is ultimately what it was. And it's just sped up into college. I went into academic psychology. I wanted to do my PhD, and I was just going all in on understanding the mind and understanding evolutionary psychology, which started to help me realize that, yeah, just because your body matures and you reach sexual maturity doesn't mean your mind matures or your spirit or your soul or your emotional resiliency. And so this is what I started to really follow. And this led me through breakups and being cheated on and having myself crushed in university and going through depression and going into drugs and alcohol, going into isolation, going into insomnia. And long story short, that trajectory led me to leave the academic path and become an entrepreneur, study health and wellness, study yoga, study meditation, and actually travel the world and get out of the cultural construct I'd been in to start finding, there are ways to embody masculinity that aren't the American dream, which I realized was bullshit for me. And money, sex, power, how to relate to these energies And it wasn't until years and years later that I actually discovered men's work and actually started going into men's circles and going and doing shadow work and unlocking these levels that, you know, many men today have no idea are even there. Or if they do have an idea, they're numbing, bypassing in addiction and abuse with these things. And so now a big part of my path, especially on the sexual relational side, through Tantra and through relating and communication mastery, is teaching and training men and women really ways to be in integrity, to embody it, to own their energy, to be impeccable with their word, and to live a better life, full spectrum.
Yeah, I find it, if we relate it to my journey, for example, I found it quite hard, and that's really interesting to go from, as you say, being, you know, an adult, but still being a boy and having like your new toys can be a new car, but being very ego driven. And then I went on a journey where I kind of rejected more sexuality, power, money, because I was like, well, that's not the answer. But a bit as a pendulum, I feel I was going the other way and I wasn't feeling grounded. Yeah. So how do you find, like, my feeling is like it's a balance and an intention in how you use these powerful tools, right? So how do you advocate to be like in your masculine, meaning you're in your power and you don't shy away from that, but not from too much of an ego place? How do you find that balance in terms of maybe practices or things to read about?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big question, and it's going to be different for everyone, but it starts with thought. You know, it starts with your thinking and the inner voice, right? And then it becomes your words, and then it becomes your actions, and then it becomes your character. And there's this whole process that all philosophers have identified. And so it really starts with getting awareness. It's all about awareness and presence as a masculine force. And this exists in men and women, but as a man, most men have a dominant masculine energy. So what you're going to need to do, and what I did, is get still. Go into nature, go into silence, isolate yourself, go into solitude, not indefinitely, but for periods. And meditation, there's many pathways, is the first step. Some form of silence. It's a relationship to silence. We don't have to get into the techniques and the dogma around it, but it's a relationship to silence. And so until you're aware of that, your mind will run the show, right? The ego mind will play out games and run the show. And a lot of men are doing that. You know, they're chasing a carrot on a stick, whether it's a new girlfriend, like you said, a new car, a new job, you know, a new hit of the dopamine of the outside world, the external, and it starts inside. And so, you know, this is what I teach in my online course now. I've kind of crystallized it for men and women, but the top 6 practices, just to do a broad brush here, that I use and I train people to use because they're the most effective, I found, is meditation, and then breath work, which is closely linked to meditation. And again, these of any flavor, really. Some are more effective than others, I've found. Some kind of self-programming. So this is where you get visualization, writing, affirmation, basically self-hypnosis. A lot of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming comes into play here. Some kind of movement. So you got to physically train on some level. There's fasting. Fasting's a really powerful way. Strategic fasting. Cold water immersion is another one. And then really, it's your nutrition. So your nutrition on all levels. What are you consuming? Food-wise, emotion-wise, content-wise, and reading. Like readers are leaders. So as a man, it's like really about knowledge and wisdom.
What's your favorite book on that topic? Or maybe 2 or 3.
That topic specifically is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore. Is the most comprehensive breakdown of the archetypes of masculinity, and it will serve people very well. But really, anything by Carl Jung is a great place to start to understand the self, and anything by David Deida. I mean, before the podcast, you mentioned Way of the Superior Man. Like many men, that was my entry point into a whole universe of this work, and I highly recommend it.
Can we go on the archetype? Because I find that's super interesting. So what is that about?
Yeah, Basically Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, the preeminent psychoanalysts of the last 150 years, they uncovered the collective unconscious, right? Turns out the inner world of man is not rational. It's ruled by what they called psychic dominance, or these subpersonalities and psychic forces, which are not woo-woo. They're measurable in dreams, in psychotherapy, in art, in music, in relating. And they're very powerful, and they're ancient. They're all humans share them. In fact, we even share them with all life. And like Eros, for example, there's an archetype of the lover and love energy, libido, the attractive energy, the sexual energy. And there's also Thanatos, which is the death energy. It's the destructive energy. It's the energy that cuts or destroys, which can be seen as a warrior type energy. And then there's the king and the magician. The king is the blessing, the compassion, the archetype of the total human being, the sovereign. And then the magician, it's the shamanic, it's the deep unconscious, the inspirational, the artistic, the one that walks between the worlds. And so these are archetypes, and there's many, many archetypes, but the four that really work for men and masculine energy are king, warrior, magician, and lover. And these are like points of reference in your psyche that you can call upon for inner resources. For example, the warrior energy is really good at setting boundaries. It's good at execution. It's good at accountability. It's good at offense in life, making money, having a partner, creating, speaking your truth, and actually causing progress to happen in your life on all levels. And, each archetype does something different. So without a relationship consciously to these forces in the total mind, body, and spirit, you'll relate to them unconsciously. You see that in the world with the amount of war and greed and, toxic domination that has been running rampant on this planet, frankly, for thousands of years.
So what does it look like then to be in that more healthy masculinity? Is it a mix? Do you sometimes go towards one archetype, sometimes towards another, and find your personal mix between these?
Yeah, it's definitely a mix, and it's unique for everyone. But the idea here is to get into wholeness. It's to come into centering. So if you're in one archetype all the time, you're going to burn out. You're going to suffer. It's actually being in a totality, in a wholeness. It's very holistic. Now, that being said, if you need to build a house, you're going to need multiple tools. And the goal of a man is to build his cup, his energy. The scholar Robert Moore, who I highly recommend, he's the author of this book. He's the co-author. And he taught many men's seminars early on in the movement. And he's just a deep, deep psychoanalyst and student of the masculine mind. And he talks a lot about holding a cup, holding a container. So you can't put libido and strong energy and drive and motivation unless you have something to hold it. So these archetypes help you build that container. And this is a lifelong journey. So sometimes you may need more boundaries. You may need more warrior energy. Other times you might need more intimacy and emotional support. And so you'll need more lover energy. Sometimes you'll need connection to the divine. You'll need healing or transformation. And that's where the magician energy comes in. And then the king energy is really about blessing. It's about witnessing, compassion, and sovereignty. And so for many men, that's a lifelong process.
Yeah, I find also definitely, you talked about the book and the practices. I guess the environment counts too, because for example, me spending more time in Bali and meeting people like you, or even, going to Akasha in these beautiful parties where people are like, some women, they're like, whoa, these are like goddesses or queens. And for me, it was projecting on me all my insecurities, so it's kind of being in an environment that pushes you to thrive and to be that, real, like kind of that man in a way is, I felt like, okay, I have to now.
Right. Well, and that's the beauty of this process is, of individuation as a man. It'll happen to you no matter what. It'll find you. There's no way to avoid it. Whether it's a beautiful woman or a crisis, an injury, an illness, an intense experience, something will call this out of you and call you up and into it.
And so you talked about rites of passage. For example, I've had rites of passage in my business school, but that would involve like drinking as much as possible and something close to bullying is probably not the most conscious way. And I feel that's more that kind of unconscious way that we have rites of passage, or we don't have any. What in your research have you found as pretty healthy, conscious rites of passage?
Yeah, the really only rites of passage, to speak to the unhealthy ones first, the only really ones that exist for men right now is in the military. So, the training, the initiation, the hazing that goes on in the military is the most intense, and it's a rite of passage, but what it creates are traumatic events, and it creates soldiers who are often disconnected and have a very high rate of PTSD, suicide, and addiction. So we don't want that. And obviously we don't also want to go off and kill our fellow humans based on ideas that have nothing to do with tribal politics and have everything to do with profit, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an example of what's out there, right? And you have fraternities, right? You have sports, you have fatherhood, marriage. There's all these mini ones. But a true rite of passage looks something like this. When a boy became too much for his mother in a tribe, and this is a co-creative process, by the way, because I think we're revivifying these things and recreating them, and they're going to look different in the modern age, but there's no one way to do it. But what it looked like, the formula, if you will, when a boy becomes too much for his mother between age 13 and 18, somewhere in there, the men of the tribe take him away from the women and the tribe as a whole, and he goes alone with the men. This might look like physical combat. This might look like a vision quest, fasting alone in the wilderness, in the woods or the desert. This might look like a ceremony with plant medicine or an intense experience, sweat lodge. There's many indigenous ways to do this. There's also the confrontation with the hunt, right? So whether that's physical, like going and killing your first animal alone or with a group, or it can be a psychic hunt or confrontation with the dragon, right? The dragon guarding the gold, which can be seen as Kundalini Shakti, or your untapped libido energy, your grandiosity, this dragon. And you have to confront that, usually in solitude, fasting, intense shamanic driving or drumming. These are many of the ways that this happens. The rites of passage I've been through have been, in many of these modalities, and this is the work I've done with Sacred Sons and with Elliot Hulse and with Mystic Misfit, a brand I've co-created, where you basically go into a retreat, a container. You have to be in a sealed container, and you go away from your life. So you're not working, you're not with your partner, you're not with your family, and you go through an intense experience that's going to involve breath, embodiment, emotion, and your psychic potential, your mind. And it's going to have to cook, and it's going to have to unfold. And for a lot of us, there's a lot of trauma there. So you're going to have to face things you haven't been willing to look at, also known as the shadow. And so you do the shadow work of the parts of you that you least want to see, and you feel them. Usually involves a catharsis. So there's a full feeling, emotion, really intense emotion that you normally can't express normally as a man. So that might include rage, violence. It might include grief, deep sadness. It might include victimhood, being a perpetrator. It might include, physicality. So you might need to, express that energy through the body. And there's a lot of different modalities for that. But the idea is, after this experience, you come more into totality, you come in more into maturity. And if it's done right, when you leave this experience, you understand what your energy's for as a man. You're willing to show up in service. You understand that the boyhood, childhood end of just selfishness and egocentric and a blindness to the tribe and the ways of the world has ended, because it cannot continue in a healthy way.
And what would be, obviously it's going to be always a little bit different according to people, but traits and behavior that would be an incarnation of the divine masculine in everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, some of the main traits that I believe and strive for, embody that, are accountability, being impeccable, being in integrity, and being a safe place for intensity for yourself and others. And so that might look like being more decisive, being more assertive. It might look like being more compassionate and being quick to understand and not try to be understood. And so these are qualities of the masculine. Also, there's a quality of execution, of follow through. There's a quality of focus and presence. That's key. And you just think about what the qualities of a true king would be, right? We all have an idea of a king, whether it's Mufasa or from Game of Thrones or some fantasy or fiction, Lord of the Rings, whatever it is. The king is the full embodiment of the divine masculine. It's the solar principle. And, Christ and Buddha, Krishna embody this. There's an energetic of deep seeing and presence where he can witness everything, but he still has compassion, but he's fierce. So his word is law, his vision is total, and his action is final. And so that's kind of the ultimate archetype of divine masculine for me.
Yeah, I can feel it holding circles. I can see for example, someone says something, my boy wanted to jump in and add something, and my more king archetype being grounded and fully listening and present. That's interesting. How do you balance? I feel men repress a lot vulnerability in general and expressing their emotions. On the other hand, my feeling is like, I want to be vulnerable, express my emotions, but at the same time being able to hold it and like not always, rely on other people to fix that and do it myself too. Where do you position the divine masculine in terms of vulnerability and expressing their problems, their emotions, without making sure you don't complain in a way?
Yeah, it's a big one. I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. If you have energy coming up, you need to process, there's emotional energy, vulnerability is going to be key. Now, the first step is, can you hold yourself? So do you just spill and vomit and just try to release it instantly on the nearest person? Or can you sit with it? Okay. So the longer you can sit with it and feel it fully, the better off you're going to be. And it might just solve itself. It might just need to move. You might need to do something about it, but it'll move on its own. The next step would be, from solitude, maybe nature, your own practices, you go to a trusted brother or mentor, or you go to a group of men and you see if there's a way to move it there. And usually that will be enough. And then if it's really intense or you want to be really vulnerable, yeah, you can go to your partner, to a woman. You can go to, someone that's a space holder, a healer, a coach, a mentor, whatever it looks like. But the idea is you don't just rush to that, right? Like a boy would rush to his mother. You're sitting in it, learning from it, asking what it's going to teach me. And you're still vulnerable, but you're not giving away your power. That's the subtlety.
Okay. Yeah. Super interesting. I had a question also. You talked about exploring the shadow. I feel in the first part of my journey towards being kind of graduating from that boy, it was a lot about, so I started meditation, being more at ease with myself, but I told you, shying away from forces like power, sex, and money. Do you feel it's like me? Often people do it in two times, kind of taking some distance and then going back into that world, that kind of manifested world, and re-entering the relationship with those forces in a more conscious way and healthy way? Or do you have, or would you recommend like not having to go the other side, and straight from the beginning working on having a healthy, incarnated spirituality and relationship with money, power, and sex, especially?
Yeah, I mean, this is the real work, because first off, it's going to be unique for each man, and I don't recommend any one way. It's going to work for you or it's not, and you're going to have to go to the extremes, or maybe you'll get it the first try. I doubt it. For me, I had to go to the extremes, right? And that's just how I operate. It's how I learn, and I'm getting better and better every time. So for a lot of men, they become emasculated when they go full spiritual and they go into collapse, right? They bypass and go into the upper centers of the chakras, if you want to call it that. And they wonder why they're broke, why women don't want to be with them, and why they don't have influence or they can't gain attention.
Happened to me.
Same happened to me as well, you know, and working with those energies is where the shadow really imprints. Okay. So money, life force energy, its value. Money only has the energy we give it. It's a neutral force. But because of our parents and because of society and economic systems, there's a lot of shadow there. There's a lot of emotional energy and stagnancy that goes into that. So that's a big one. And this is the root. This is the sacral. This is the solar plexus. Sexuality is probably the most powerful and very related to money. How do we imprint in sexuality? Our first sexual experience. There's our relationship to our mother as a man. How does that look? Is it healthy emotionally? How do you relate to women? Can you hold a stable relationship where you express needs, desires, fears, and libido in a healthy way? Huge. And that's where a lot of men will get into loops, okay, of codependency, of avoidance, of addiction, of these various outlets, right? And then power is the third of this triad, and it's very intimately connected to the other two. And power means, you know, you say you can do something and you do it. Or when you speak, people listen. Or when you have a vision, you execute. When you want to manifest from a disembodied place, you know, not a lot's going to happen in your life. But if you're willing to step into fear and lean in and take more action than thought, in a healthy ratio, of course, that's when your life really starts to open up. And that's what happened to me. Like when I really started to get serious and get to my limit of bypassing and disembodiment and just going to the extreme of ultra spiritual collapse. I'm going to be pacified and at peace and afraid of life. I don't want to hurt anyone with my masculine aggression. You know, I wasn't flowing money and sex and power. But when you start to run those energies and understand them and have respect and have impeccability and integrity with them, life will play with you. And a lot of men that I've worked with, and women, in their masculine energy, because women possess a masculine energy as well, that's where the real power is, of unlocking those places.
That's super interesting that you talk about. Okay, let's go on sexuality first. A lot of people from Napoleon Hill to Freud talk about the sexual energy being probably the most powerful energy, especially for creation, but probably overall. Do you, like, when I look with hindsight, for example, I quit porn 3 years ago. I feel that was a very, very good decision. And also, like, there's a lot of shame around sex, and I've tried to rewire that, even in the way I have sex in general, but also self-pleasure. I would take like an hour, take it more like a meditation. And that's something I got for Tantra. I know you and your girlfriend are quite into this too. So I feel like sexual energy is so important. It's good to have practices also around this. What do you recommend for people who want to harness a bit better their sexual energy and rewire maybe the way they approach it?
Yeah, and I agree and love the work of Napoleon Hill, especially Think and Grow Rich and Outwitting the Devil. This stuff is just, it's natural law, and the sexual force is the creative force. So it creates everything, not just other humans. It's where creativity comes from. So it's very powerful. It's the root of everything else. And yeah, the relationship to it's everything as a man. And yeah, I'm blessed to have a partner who practices this as well. So I've learned a lot through my own experience and in relationship. But the first thing for a man, and you already said it, is pornography. And, you know, I went through my own stint with porn, and, you know, it's a very insidious product that, well, there's a saying, if something's free and it's freely given, you're the product. So what you got to understand is the agenda behind pornography. And, you know, I'm told, and I've never experienced it, but I'm told there's conscious versions of porn, and porn created, you know, with intention. But let's be honest, by and large, tons of the internet traffic is unconscious, toxic, very programmable stuff that is. And let's say,
even if you wouldn't watch porn, let's say even going in a bathroom for 2 minutes and doing it as a shameful, like masturbating as a shameful activity.
Right, exactly. And so that's kind of number one is like unhook from porn as a man. This is for a man. And yeah, the self-pleasure, like making it a ritual as opposed to many people. Yeah, it's the shame around it and the guilt, and it's disconnecting from the body rather than going into the body as a meditation, right? So tantric practice, yeah, is spending time exploring your body, making it way less about finishing or reaching a goal and way more about sensation and actually building your energy body. And that goes along with, semen retention. So ejaculating too much is just, now it's scientifically proven and shown, and the Taoists and the ancient Vedic sages understood this millennia ago. It depletes your vital life force energy. So if you're spilling your seed all the time, and you're going to spill your thought and your emotion and your life force, and it's going to lower and lower your ability to show up as a man. So that's the major thing. And what I do with clients is, it's a 21-day challenge. Can you, while still self-pleasuring and or having sex, not spill your seed for 21 days, right? And you take it 7 days at a time, and with no porn and with no, shame and guilt involved, or like this really mechanical way a lot of us learned about this stuff, because there's sexual education that's holistic. It's coming for the children of new generations, but a lot of us didn't grow up with it. So yeah, it's like getting rid of porn, making self-pleasure ritualistic, and then semen retention, and learning how to circulate that energy. And I really recommend, the work of Mantak Chia and his system. And really the Taoist method, I think, is the best, which can be found through Qigong, Tai Chi, using your bioenergetic electrics of your energy to actually circulate arousal instead of just letting it get stuck in the genitals and then just releasing it unconsciously.
And Mantak Chia, is it the book To Be a Multi-Orgasmic Man?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and then you get the perks of being probably more attractive to a woman too.
Right.
And it's interesting.
Testosterone goes up. It's shown.
Yeah, and it also relates to, we talked about circles and being able to hold it at some point. So that's like definitely a good training for it.
Oh yeah.
Super interesting. Thanks. There's something I wanted to talk about also. You talked about women also. So we're talking about divine masculine, but this is for men and women, right? And probably to a bigger extent for men, but also like we both have masculine and feminine energy. In a world where this vision is sometimes challenged, by ways of thinking that everything that like men and women are completely a cultural construct. Where would you position masculinity and femininity? How much does it relate to the gender, men and women? And also, what is your take on that debate that takes place around if this even exists, or if it's or if gender is a social construct? I mean, I've heard of cultures where you have more than two genders and around there.
Yeah, and disclaimer, I'm not an expert on this, and this is what I deal with, creating a lot of content online. I've had a lot of people get triggered. So if someone's listening to this and you identify with that community of trans, LGBTQ, all these things, invitation to take ownership of your experience here. I believe in my own experience that there are two genders, there are two energetics, and the goal is to be balanced within them. And that's going to depend on what kind of body you're in. So if you're in a female body, you're probably going to be feminine energy dominant. If you're in a male body, you're going to be masculine energy dominant. There are exceptions, but I don't think we should change the whole system. I don't think nature fucked up. Let me say it that way. We don't need to bring in God or invoke religion, but just nature itself. Evolution is the most intelligent supercluster of forces known, and everything is nature, right? Big Bang, galactic clusters, all the way down to atoms and cells. I don't think nature fucked up. If it wanted us to have multiple energetic components, it might make more than two genders or more than two types of, genitalia. It didn't. So I think, I've heard of indigenous cultures that had the third gender. Some have five. There's like masculine and feminine together, like androgynous. There's feminine men, there's masculine women, and that I think is true and exists. It's the exception though. So the bottom line is this: the post-modernist idea that gender is a social construct and can be cast away and it's really a free-for-all is a toxic ideology. And that's a whole nother podcast. I would highly recommend listening to Jordan Peterson and his lectures, which are all available, and his books and his research, who has just shown how corruptive that idea can be. And more grounded and embodied, because a lot of that's theoretical. Let me put it this way. Show me a man, let's just stay with men. I'm a man. I identify as a man. Show me a man who is thriving and successful and healthy just from anyone's standard. Like anyone could just look and be like, that guy is healthy and holistic. Who isn't embodying the principles we're talking about on this podcast? I've never seen it once. So I just, it's hard for me to believe. And postmodernist theorists and these, transgender activists and things who I got nothing but love for. Like, I would never tell you not to be what you want to be. But when you start making other people have to say what this XYZ, now you're getting into infringements. And here in the States, we have the Constitution, which isn't perfect, but it's the most liberal Constitution that's been around. And I'm sure there's upgrades happening in other countries. I'm sure there's stuff I don't know about. But from what I understand, the right to free speech and expression is very important as a human being. So all human beings have a yin and a yang pole, right? Sun and the moon, right? Thought and feeling, right and left. There's a bilateral symmetry in human beings. And so that extends to masculine and feminine energy, which yin and yang is probably a better way to look at it. Again, the Taoists figure this out. Yin energy is receptive. Yang energy is penetrative. We all have it. It all exists in our brain. We have lateral hemispheres, and it exists in like the mind or thought and those concepts, and the heart, right? Which is more spontaneous. It's more about desire. Maybe there's more emotion there, more soul. You can use whatever words you want. The bottom line is we want to be integrated. So as a man, you don't want to have a shut down feminine energy, right? And be really stuck in that. And as a woman, you don't want to have a shut down masculine energy and not be able to create boundaries or containers or be driven. So, at the end of the day, it's all about integration.
So interesting. And you talked about kind of the attributes of that divine masculine. Can't remember all of them. There was accountability, being impeccable, executing on your vision. What would be, in contrast, the attributes of the divine feminine?
Yeah, so the feminine is that which is changing, right? So it's flux. It's more of the chaos, where masculine is more of the cosmos. And I mean this in the Greek sense of order and structure. And the feminine is flow. It's change. It's this healing energy, nurturing energy, very erotic energy. It's Eros, right? So it's like the nature of, life and evolution and change in a direction of beauty, right? In a direction of embodiment. Feminine energy is really good for filling the container with life-giving qualities. It's all about sensation. It's about perception. It's about feeling. It's about emotion. And it's about artistic. It's creative energy. The feminine is actually a void creative energy that can be turned into anything else. And you see this even in the embryo and in the ontology of a human being, where basically life is female first and then becomes male. And that depends on the species, right? But even as humans, that's what we see in the womb. So feminine energy, which we all have, is the void. It's the creative. It's receptive energy.
Super interesting. And now about that polarity you talked about, why is it important to have this polarity and to understand this concept of polarity?
Well, yeah, if you're ignorant of polarity or not embodying it, and you're playing with half a deck, right? So you only have half a deck of cards. So you're not going to have this full spectrum human experience. You're also going to, struggle to relate to those strong energies of sex, money, and power. And also your attention and your focus are going to be different if you don't have them playing in a dance, right? It's a polarity dance, just like two magnets. There's an arc of energy and attraction that happens when they're both in play. If you have two of the same polarity, it becomes locked up or dead, inert. And if you only have one, then you can't create the energetic. You just have a floating energy that can work for a while, but it will eventually burn out or become inert itself. So for men, that looks like, if you're not aware of your feminine, you'll have no idea how to heal or transform your life on any level. And you'll probably, go into some kind of suppression or trauma because there's not an open life force flowing. And as a woman, if you suppress the masculine side, you're going to find yourself dependent or in toxic relationships or without structure. And it's going to be very chaotic to the point where you won't feel safe. So there's an element to both of them. And really it's about cultivating the inner opposite. So for men, initiation often happens through the feminine, unlocking the feminine, opening it up. For women, it happens through the masculine, unlocking it, tapping into it, embodying it.
Yeah, while being comfortable, for example, for a man, opening the feminine while still being comfortable, embodying that divine masculine, because then you end up in a situation where that's what David Deda talks about a lot in a lot of relationships, because the man isn't, I feel in society there's a bit of shame around masculinity that might be justified according to some what you call toxic masculinity, but that creates a bit of repression of masculinity overall, and then men become kind of too soft in a way and don't understand why they're not attractive anymore to their wife or partner.
Yeah, 100%. And this is the problem. The idea of toxic masculinity is just utter bullshit, and it's a cultural meme that the mainstream media is using for an agenda. It's actually not possible for masculinity to be toxic. That's like saying toxic sunlight, because masculinity, its ultimate level as an ideal archetype, it is what it is. Now, yeah, there's assholes and there's machismo and bravado and men who have toxic behavior, but that does not mean masculinity is toxic. So that's become out of control, and for good reason. I understand why, with Me Too and the feminine pain body and that mass movement, there's a lot of trauma there that's been uncovered. So, I don't blame anyone or judge individuals. I think that as a man, when you unlock your feminine, you can't collapse into it. So you can't just become a feeling mess and then become codependent on others. And there's a level of comfort and of your ego game that you're playing. What ego game are you playing? Are you playing the manly man, the machismo game? Won't leave a lot of room for the feminine. Are you playing the ultra spiritual guy? That's not going to leave a lot of room for your masculine. So there's a balancing act, right? And this is why you can't do it alone. The bottom line here, Alex, is you got to find a brotherhood. You got to find other men who are doing this and relate to them in a healthy way. And so a lot of men are isolated. The lone wolf starves. It's a bullshit ideology that you have to do everything alone, or that's the way your father did it. You have to find other men.
Nice. And we can see everywhere popping, especially, for example, here in Australia, I see a lot in Bali, men's group, and that's really, really good to see. We're going to finish soon. What is the impact you want to have in the world, Kevin?
It's a great question. I mean, my goal in 2020 is to reach 1 million people with my content, my art, right? My video, my philosophy, my speech. And that's the impact I want to have this year. Beyond that, it's the impact specifically is it's inspiration. It's inspiring wakefulness, inspiring awareness and presence, thinking about things in a new way. And that's what I do on my podcast, The Revolution, the Re-Evolution. It's evolutionary thinking. So, I want to be a pollinator of good memes. I want to be a paradigm shifter. I am that. And I am, helping people decisively step into their power, whether that's through creating wealth and, entrepreneurship, whether that's through creating powerful relationships, good sex, good polarity, strong energetics, or whether that's creating just mind-body mastery. So I'm a philosopher at the end of the day, and maybe a little bit of a comedian too. So those energies are there to bring more joy and bring more awareness to our species as we enter the most intense initiation as a collective ever on this planet.
Yeah, I feel like that's a beautiful mission, and that the timing for it is critical. We definitely need that in this coming this new decade. So thank you for doing this work. That's amazing. I'll definitely share that with so many people because this is so interesting. And not sure if I can alone get you to that million views, but like definitely spread the word. Thank you so much, Kevin. How can people follow you and what's next for you?
Yeah, thank you, brother, for inviting me. I mean, I'm on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Instagram's at Kev_Oroslan, Oroszlan. And then, yeah, it's my name on Facebook. I have a fan page where I post a lot of stuff, and I have a YouTube channel as well. Yeah, and I have a podcast, iTunes, Spotify, all the places. It's the Revolution podcast. R is in parentheses. And, there I do what you're doing. I invite epic people and hear from them on their story and their embodiment. And yeah, what I'm most excited about right now is a group mastermind I'm developing, which is around my own version of the 4 archetypes and really training the next class of upcoming coaches, consultants, healers, and creatives, and teaching them everything I've learned and take them through 4 months of coaching and then a 5-day mastermind in paradise. And that'll be dropping soon. All that's going to be seen on my website, kevinoros.com. It's just myname.com. And right now I have an online course, which I love, which I mentioned earlier, that teaches the top 6 practices to create the dopest, most next level morning routine and just stay in embodiment through that 21-day challenge. It's a 6-week course, but it has multiple 21-day challenges in it to, meditate every day, do breath work, get into cold water, fast, optimize your nutrition, your self-hypnosis and programming, and your reading and writing ability. And that's at flowstatemastery.com, where I run that online course. You take it at your own pace. And I have a private tribe of flow masters where we share all that together in a group.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing. Do you have a last word for our listeners?
Yeah, thank you again, Alex. You inspire me, bro. And yeah, the last word is, in 2020, the archetype is initiation. It's clear vision. It's perfect vision. So if you've been waiting to do something, if you've been waiting to tell someone how you feel, if you've been waiting to create, start your own business, travel, do it now. You cannot wait. The ancestors laid down prayers so you could be here right now at the turning in a time of prophecy. Let's go.
Boom. Getting goosebumps right now. I'm sure the listener too. Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you to the listener.